What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. Joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones and AJ. We're here to talk about Andrej Stojaković, a target for North Carolina, the California transfer, committed to Illinois earlier today. And we're just going to sit here and kind of talk about how it went down, maybe how Carolina missed out on Stoyaković, even if that's the right terminology to use. We're going to discuss all that here in this podcast. So, AJ, let's just dive right into it. From a Carolina perspective, because we've talked about on podcasts before recently about how it feels like Carolina needs one more guy, and what they really need is a bucket getter, somebody like an Andrej Stojaković who's done it before in the ACC in a Power 5 conference, really elite scorer, really good three for the Tar Heels. It made a lot of sense on paper especially when you consider who they've lost in Drake Powell in particular, that Carolina would be interested in someone like Andrej Stojaković. Obviously ended up committing to Illinois. So from a Carolina perspective, what happened there?
Okay, so I can say this, that I'm not 100% sure now that we're getting information that we didn't have previously, in part because some of the sources had kind of gone quiet. It was very quiet with sources that we generally talk to going back to Friday morning or so.
Because we were ready, AJ. We did a commitment pod late last week just because of what we were hearing at the time. And let me preface, we do those sometimes just because
we
want to.
We didn't do it because we thought he might go to, because he thought he would go to Carolina.
No, it was just the time.
At the time we did it, we were still very much in the fact-finding process. And we were here, and David spoke to Stoyaković. David Sisk, our basketball guy, spoke to Stoyaković on the phone. And sometimes you have to read the tea leaves, and sometimes they don't mean anything. A lot of times we'll talk to a football prospect and he'll say glowing things about the program. 48 hours later, commit to a rival school. That happens. And as I'm getting phone call after phone call, everybody wants to know what happened. I'll just send them the link to this podcast.
Yeah, for real.
So Carolina did hit their people. Spoke with Stojakovic's people at the very minimum. We don't know if Stojaković actually spoke to Carolina. And the initial conversations, especially when you have a GM, are money. And there was a no contact when he entered the portal. So generally, that means the guy has his eye on a school. Usually pick another school pretty quickly. News came out that Illinois was the school for Stojaković pretty soon after he entered the portal and had the no contact. Obviously, he ended up picking Illinois. Everybody was right. All the people who projected that in crystal ball, that they were 100% right all along. Carolina entered the picture because the Stojaković camp put that out there, and it was being reported, and we got to confirm by Andrej himself. So our sources on the UNC side, yes, there is interest. Of course they would want him. They recognize that someone like that, if you can get him, you cannot pass on that. I'm paraphrasing. This is not what we were told, but it's sort of read between the lines what we were told. Mm-hmm. We were also told that money would be an issue because they were basically out of money, out of the collective. They had about $700,000 left in the collective, and that wasn't suitable for Stojaković. He's a $2.5-3 million guy. Basically, he'll be one of the higher paid portal players in the country this year. So part of the discussion with sources was, how are they going to go about accumulating, cobbling together enough cash to get him? And we were told one of two things would have to happen, or both combined. A, donors step up and say, let's get this guy now. Or B, Jim Tanner would have to break the ceiling, guarantee the money, spend it, which you don't have, and then deal with Bubba Cunningham later, basically. Okay, so I'm paraphrasing, but it's not a super loose paraphrase. Yeah. So that's kind of where they were. So basically, Illinois had the money all along. Stanford this weekend came forward with a ton of money, and Carolina didn't do anything. So our understanding, as of the last time until today, that Carolina, we had heard from Carolina that there was any interest from sources that know where Carolina stands, would have been Friday morning. And Stanford came in and everything else. So what I'm saying is, in a roundabout kind of way, is we don't think in the end Carolina was in the hunt for him because it just didn't have the money. In order to get the money, someone else was going to have to come in and bring it, or Tanner was going to have to go rogue on it. And if anybody knows Hubert Davis, Hubert's not going to approve going rogue.
Yeah.
So I put that on our board, said, look, that's another option. I think there are a lot of programs in the country that would, because they do. Mm-hmm. Hubert's a different guy. He is so principled, and he wasn't going to do that. And to his credit, from a character and principle standpoint, kudos to him. However, they need a bucket getter. They didn't get this bucket getter, and now they still need a bucket getter. And you and I are going to do a podcast that we're going to run Tuesday afternoon about what's next. But they're sitting around the Dean Smith Center right now looking around and saying, okay, we don't have that bucket getter. And we never really were in play with this guy. So that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, let's explore. I want to explore what you just talked about with the money situation a little bit further, because when you say something like that Carolina, again, essentially didn't have the money that they needed to go get Andrej Stojaković, my mind immediately goes to two things. It goes to, do they not have the money because they don't have the money? And what I mean by that is it just, hey, we don't have that amount that we need in general? Or is it a situation where you look back and kind of say, we don't have the money because I'm not going to say overpaid for other guys, but we spent too much money now where we don't really have the money that we need to go out and afford a bucket getter like Andrej Stojaković. I wonder what that situation looks like, and if that's even something you can expand on a little bit.
Well, let me first say that the narrative last spring was off. It was false that they didn't have money to get a big guy. They had money. Hubert had a certain principle he was going to follow then and didn't do it, and didn't get the big guy. They have a lot more money. They had a lot more money for this portal process. In fact, if I'm rolling in my head, the numbers in my head, they're at about 11.3 million. So they've spent money. They had to keep their own guys, and they've spent money on guys to come in. So you're asking two questions here. The first one, did they overspend on some guys? Well, I think maybe a couple guys they could have gotten for a little bit less. I know the numbers. I'm not going to throw them out there. They could have maybe gotten for a little bit less. They could have trimmed a little bit on Vasar, trimmed a little bit on Evans, trimmed a little bit on Stevenson, his situation was at the same time Diabate signed with Kentucky, and they played the same role last year. So that kind of may have driven up the Stevenson price. So had they gotten him 5 days sooner, perhaps he would have been cheaper. The incoming freshmen are getting very nice money. Caleb Wilson's getting a ton of money. He's getting more than anybody on the team. So maybe if there were some areas they could have trimmed here and trimmed there, they would have had a little bit more to add to what's left in the collective, which is around $700,000, and you go get somebody. That wouldn't have been Stoyaković. They never would have been able to get him under the current collective, given who else they got. So let's say that they, in hindsight, they go back and say, well, let's give Jonathan Powell back and let's trim these other guys. You'd still be in the 2.2, 2.3 range. Not sure that would be enough to get Stojaković. So the money was there to build this roster, and they've spent a lot on the roster. They spent a lot on the roster. Yeah. Some guys getting paid really, really well that they have a lot to prove. Mm-hmm. But they probably had to do that because I think the going rate is now you kind of have to do that. Yeah. Also, when it got to this point, they didn't have it. Now, this is one reason why I think the portal window's open too long. The portal should open 2 days after. This should open Thursday after the national championship. It should be open about 10 days. Everybody is thinking about what they're going to do. All the guys on teams have been eliminated, have plenty of time to figure out what they're going to do. The national championship guys, okay, it starts in 2 days, but you get 10 days. You get enough time to get your information and make a decision. Some guys kind of wait, and I'm not saying Stoyaković did this at all. I'm just saying that I could see moving forward ways to gain the system. Well, if I wait a little while, teams are going to be desperate because they missed out on somebody, so they're going to overpay me. I can see that happening, which is why I think this whole process needs to be in a more narrow zone than it is. And in that case, Carolina would have qualified Drake Powell sooner. Lubin maybe wouldn't have had the kind of conversations he had with Carolina at the end. The roster might look a little bit different. And maybe one of those point guards they talked to early on would have more quickly jumped at North Carolina instead of waiting some. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there because I think right now they're a little bit of a victim of the process. Mm-hmm. And the reality is this, even with being one of the top 10 teams in the country in collective and portal money and money to pay your roster, they still didn't have enough. And that's kind of a scary thought because if you look at it, I actually think they got a bargain with Seth Trimble. So maybe some of the money could have gone to him. Seth gave them a hometown discount, if you will. So 11.3 with donors and the possible of ads. But the thing about it is, who are the guys that have done the ads at Carolina? Armando did a ton. RJ did a ton. Elliott had that one. They all came in as freshmen. They all chose Carolina. They were embraced a little bit more. Elliott was kind of a surprise when he did his, but RJ and Armando were obvious. You know, had Brady Manick had a second year at Carolina, he probably would have done some commercials too. But a lot of these guys are coming in for 1 year. So as much as Carolina wants to sell in this program, you have a lot of outside NIL revenue opportunities. But if people don't know who they are, people didn't start falling in love with Harrison Ingram until late January, early February. By then it was too late because he was gone 2 months later, 2.5 months later. So that's a pitch. But I think that's a part of the pitch that Carolina needs to include but not lean on, because I don't think that's going to sway many guys unless there's someone out there that says, hey, I'm going to play there for 3 years and be a star for 3 years, which guys don't stick around that long if they are, unless they're in that borderline area like Armando and RJ have been. So it's a tough situation for Carolina. I think that they brought in a lot of nice parts. I like the pieces individually they brought in. Collectively, when you look at it, there's sort of a glaring hole.
It's that skyline analogy.
It's a hole that Stoyakovic would have filled, but the money wasn't there.
Yeah, so, and last thing I'll say on it, we'll get out of here because we're going to talk about more about what's next in the other podcast we do that comes out on Tuesday. But I tweeted out afterwards that it felt like a big miss for North Carolina, and I think a lot of people misconstrued that as me saying that they solely looked at it like Carolina missed on Andrej Stojaković. And that wasn't really what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say is, and I think we talked about this in the Jaden Young podcast, I believe, where I think you asked me, you were like, what would you rate Carolina's portal class so far? And I gave it a C-. And I've talked about this on Twitter a little bit too. But there was a big caveat there of, but if you get a bucket getter like an Andrej Stojaković, then I think this class jumps really heavily. I think I gave it like a B+. And the reason I gave it that is because, like you just said, there feels like there's this kind of glaring hole there of, okay, I like these pieces and I like some of these parts and I think some of these guys will work out well, but there's also no guarantee with some of these guys. But you're looking at it and you're saying, where's the bucket getter? And that's the term we keep using. Where's the guy that you can almost pencil in as a guaranteed offensive producer night in, night out for you? And Andrej Stojaković felt like that guy. So when I said Carolina missed on Andrej Stojaković, I don't care what his name is, but when you look at his stat line and the skill set there, that type of player, it feels like this whole entire portal process, Carolina hasn't gone out and secured. And I find that very interesting. And that's another reason I brought up the money question too, AJ. Of like, if I'm sitting there, this is just my opinion, it feels so glaringly obvious that the roster would be much improved with a guy like an Andrej Stojaković. Yeah. So why is it on late April, you're kind of sitting there like, man, even if we want a player like this, I don't know if we can afford him. Like that is an interesting place to be right now when you look at the roster as a whole, in my opinion, at least.
One of the ugly realities about the portal now for both football and basketball is the way for players to get raises is to leave.
It's so
go to a new school. So when you lose a lot of guys that must be replaced, either through graduation, going pro, or they transfer, you have to replace them. So what would RJ command in the portal? What would Ian command Carolina in the portal? Drake. Jalen Withers, et cetera. What would all these guys command in the portal? It would be very, very expensive. They might not be able to have last year's roster this year, given how they played this past season, what we now know about them, because of the expense of bringing guys in. You got to pay them more. It's like when you change jobs. Let's say you have a job in Raleigh and you get a job in Denver. They're going to give you a moving stipend and that kind of thing. They're going to bump you up. Well, we'll give you 15,000 more because we really want you. You got to come here. It's the same thing. So it's a little cheaper to keep your guys, but you guys have to want to stay, and you guys have to be willing to say, this is my program. This is who I am. I'm going to stay for this amount, and I'm going to be happy with it because this is where I want to be. It's almost like they pay a price, so to speak, literally, to be somewhere. I'm going to get $300,000 less here, but you know what? I want to be here. And there's a life satisfactory thing that's part of the process. Seth Trimble's a perfect example. What Seth is getting at Carolina could have gotten more somewhere else. There's no doubt. Seeing the numbers being thrown around, there's no doubt. And the numbers went up. That's the thing. A lot of guys are getting twice now in the portal this year what they would have gotten a year ago, because inflation in the portal is gone crazy, and it went up after the portal opened. Once deals started being made, it went up. That's one of the reasons Van Allen Lubin's no longer there, because what was a great deal 5 days after they got back from Milwaukee was not such a great deal 3 weeks later. That's where we are. That's why they're not having guardrails on all of this stuff is a massive problem. And at some point, and I know the Jay Billis of the world would never say that because he just wants the players to run everything, which is, I think, absurd. You have to say, well, what about the school? What about the program? That's the platform that these guys play on. There needs to be guardrails for them too, because without them, these kids have nowhere to play. And no one is thinking on that level right now, but they need to. And if that were the case, and Carolina had a little bit more money in the collective, then perhaps they could have budgeted for him. Or if Stoyakovic was going to go, he's in that 10-day window I was talking about of leaving. And you could say, well, yeah, that's higher on our pecking order, but you don't wait until later on. It's like you go ahead and you let's say you come home from a hard day of work and you're starving, and you just make yourself a sandwich and you have some chips and something to drink. And then Carly comes home 45 minutes later with a pizza. Well, you've already eaten. You like to have that pizza, but you've already eaten. If you knew the pizza was coming, you wouldn't have had that sandwich, and you'd be able to indulge in the pizza. We're seeing stuff like that in the portal. And perhaps Carolina would have gone all in on Stoyakovic had he entered the portal right away, or if it was a 10-day window and he had no choice but to enter when everybody else does.
Or maybe, like you said, kind of what you were alluding to there, correct me if I'm wrong, if Carolina maybe retains some more of its roster from last season, then you've kind of potentially got more money to spend because you're not having to fork it out to get other guys to come in.
Well, I'll say it right now. If they retained Ian Jackson, they wouldn't have needed Stoyakovic.
It's a good point, too, yeah.
And they could have gotten Ian Jackson for far less than Stoyakovic wants. But that's a different story for a different day. I don't want to go there. Not right now. I'll leave it at that. That way I won't get in any trouble.
To be continued. Maybe we'll talk about it in another podcast.
Perhaps.
Potentially.
We'll have that in one of our private THI Zooms with premium subscribers.
Yeah, we might need to, man, with all this portal stuff. That's the one good thing about the portal is there's a lot of juicy information that I think gets tossed
Stuff
around.
That I've learned in the last couple of weeks is wild, man.
It's a crazy one, man. It is the wild, wild west, to say the least. And yeah, I mean, something's got to be done to at least, you've got to mediate it a little better than because there's like nothing going on right now in terms of, someone kind of taking the reins and saying, hold on, let's like put some, regulations and rules in here. It's just kind of like, yeah, do whatever you want. Like, yeah, it's fine.
It's the 1849 gold rush, man.
It's just, it's an insane one, man. And I think it seems like every year too, it gets crazier. Like it feels like the portal 3 years ago.
By leaps and bounds.
It's crazy.
It's like a keg party from high school, right? At 8 o'clock, a lot of the kids are there, but they all haven't shown up. Everybody looks good. They're fresh. They're showered. Hair's looking pretty good. By 9 o'clock, there's a little louder. There's a little messier. By 10 o'clock, around the keg, it's kind of wet, nasty, and muddy.
Yeah, you got some towels down there, yeah.
And by 11 o'clock, people are falling down drunk And so there's some fights. A guy breaks up with a girl. She's crying. And then by midnight, the cops come. Right? At least that's my experience back in the day.
Had a few of those, yeah.
Way back in the day. So it's messy like that. It's getting crazier. Each year is like an hour at a keg party.
Mm-hmm. That's a great analogy, actually. It's such a weird one, man. And hopefully it'll change. But at this rate, AJ, any change is going to just keep getting crazier and crazier.
That's an analogy that really does hit home. There's a tremendous amount of experience behind that analogy.
Yeah. I know there's plenty of experience on your end, AJ. I know that for a fact. I've heard a few
Way
stories.
back.
We'll talk about that on another podcast, maybe. We can talk about that. That might be information you don't want to share either, like the Ian Jackson stuff. So
when I leave the industry and have nothing to lose, then maybe I'll do a podcast about those keg parties.
Yeah, hey, like your dad says, AJ, save it for the book. Save it for the book, man. Yeah,
I have to have 2 books now.
Yeah, at least you might just have a book on the portal stuff. That'll be a separate book in itself, man. It's absolutely insane.
That chapter's getting bigger.
Yeah, it is getting bigger by the day, man. No doubt about it. And make sure you guys look for that other podcast we're going to do talking about kind of what's next for Carolina in the portal on Tuesday. This obviously coming out on Monday evening. So, we appreciate you guys watching as always. Get involved in the comments. Are you, based on kind of what we've said in this podcast and looking at Andrej Stojaković as a player, you kind of upset that Carolina ultimately couldn't get him for whatever reason? Or do you still think Carolina needs to go out and get a bucket getter like that in the portal? Do you think they will? We want to hear from you guys in the comments below. So make sure you like, make sure you share, subscribe to, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.